Christopher Nolan loves to tell complex stories on enormous scales. With Oppenheimer, Nolan pushed his technical abilities to the next level, creating a biopic as only he could. What makes Oppenheimer such a special entry in Nolan's filmography?
Hard to put a price on it.
How did Nolan's trademarks converge in epic proportions? This is how they shot it, Oppenheimer. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to Studio Binder and click the bell to stay in the know on all our filmmaking videos. Thanks to the following users for suggesting this video topic. In this video, we'll use Studio Binder's shot list to look at some of Christopher Nolan's technical choices from shot to shot. Let the countdown begin.
2, 1.
Christopher Nolan had been interested in Robert Oppenheimer for years. The director found himself intrigued by the inner conflict he could see in the physicist.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
But the process really got in motion during the shooting of Tenet. When Robert Pattinson gave Nolan a collection of Oppenheimer's speeches as a wrap gift, the director learned about Oppenheimer's knowledge that an atomic bomb had the potential to ignite Earth's atmosphere.
Well, we had a moment where it looked like the chain reaction from an atomic device might never stop, setting fire to the atmosphere.
The idea stuck with him.
At the end of that film, I was left with an interest in that particular moment. What if, rather than using it as a science fiction analogy, what if we actually try and take the audience into that room for that moment? What would that be?
6.
Nolan proceeded to write a screenplay based on the preeminent biography of Oppenheimer, American Prometheus by Kai Bird and Martin J. Sherwin. He decided to break a fundamental rule of screenplays, writing the script in first person, emphasizing that the story would be told primarily through Oppenheimer's perspective. Early on in the process, Nolan knew who he wanted to play the titular role.
I've known for 20 years that Cillian Murphy is one of the greatest actors of his generation, or any generation. So I had a lot of confidence going into Oppenheimer that, yeah, he's one of the greats. This is his chance to show what he could do at the center of a big movie like this, where the challenge is to carry the audience through the experience.
Robert. Break a leg.
But Oppenheimer doesn't stand out only for its strong script and performances. Let's begin by looking at the film's IMAX cinematography. When audiences think of an IMAX film, they typically expect huge spectacles and widescreen action. Oppenheimer, however, is not your typical IMAX project, primarily following various dialogue-heavy scenes.
Robert, you see beyond the world we live in,
with only one massive set piece. This meant that Nolan and cinematographer Hoyt van Hoytema needed to use IMAX in a way it had rarely been used before. According to Hoytema, IMAX was preferred for these private moments.
In this film, the more intimate the situation got, the more up close and personal things got, the more you want to get in there with an IMAX camera.
But this approach has its limits, primarily because of sound. IMAX cameras are very loud, making it difficult to shoot dialogue scenes in the format. For dialogue-heavy scenes, of which there are many, Hoytema and Nolan made sure to give themselves options.
We would shoot on the 5x 70mm camera, but we very often would add an extra shot or an extra take on an IMAX camera to see if Chris could probably salvage the sound of it and put it in the films.
When's this place supposed to open?
2 months.
Most of the lenses used throughout the film were custom built. Because the film focused on the character's interiority, Huytema knew close-ups would be paramount. This meant building lenses that could pull focus at very small distances from the camera. Many of the close-ups were shot on a 40mm lens. Huytema insisted on using the wider lens because we were fanatic about creating a language in which we feel we were participating and not just observing.
We have one lens that we refer to as the paranoia lens. It's a lens that was just a little too wide. It's the paranoia lens because it's so wide, yet it can go very close, so you very obviously invade somebody's private space. As a watcher, you can really understand the proximity of a camera.
Lens choices also depended on the point of view. For the black and white sequences, the camera is physically closer to Lewis Strauss, since it is his perspective. And Oppenheimer, in these scenes, is shot on a longer lens. Custom lenses also had to be built for Oppenheimer's visions of subatomic particles. While the team wasn't actually filming atoms, they were filming at an extremely small scale. According to Panavision lens engineer Dan Sasaki, Huytema asked for a wide-angle microscope for IMAX, a lens which had never been built before. Sasaki and his team built two lenses, a 24mm and a 35mm, along with a lens relay which magnifies the image without sacrificing quality. These wide lenses, in combination with the lens relay, allowed the Oppenheimer crew to film microscopic elements as though they were large landscapes. To make the building process even more complex, the whole rig needed to be waterproof, since many of the microscopic shots were underwater. This wasn't the only groundbreaking use of technology in the film. For the movie's black and white sequences, Huytema shot in IMAX on 65mm black and white stock, a feature film first.
Correct.
Nolan used it to differentiate between timelines, color film for fission and black and white for fusion.
It was very much being guided by the balance between the color sequences where we're trying to see everything from his point of view, be in his head, see through his eyes, and then the black and white sequences, which are much more Robert Downey Jr.'s point of view.
Huytema also experimented with light sources throughout the film. He explains, "I had a mix of everything during the shoot. Old-fashioned tungstens and workhorse 18K Arimax HMIs for when I needed some punch." His general approach was to use soft lighting for color scenes
Right, yes.
and harsher lighting for the black and white sequences. Huytema also used LEDs, a light fixture he had been reluctant to use previously. These lights were almost entirely battery-powered and connected to nearly latency-free receivers and transmitters. That way, Huytema and his team could change lighting textures instantaneously. For the long interrogation scenes in Room 2021, Huytema didn't use any light fixtures inside the set. Instead, LED boards outside the window were used as the primary light source. The LEDs gave him more control over the color of the light, adjusting it as the time of day evolves.
Well, then you knew, did you not, that by dropping that atomic bomb on the target you selected, that thousands of civilians would be killed or injured. Is that correct?
LEDs were crucial for reaction shots during the Trinity test. Huytema and gaffer Adam Chambers used state-of-the-art wireless LED panels to create textured lighting on characters' faces that was synchronized with the explosion. Nolan explains, "You're seeing a beautiful, subtle, continual interactive lighting change, and you're seeing it in 3 different locations from 3 different perspectives." Hoyt van Huytema's cinematography throughout Oppenheimer creates stunning visuals in one of Nolan's most visually subdued films. Of course, the movie isn't entirely without spectacle. And for that, Nolan primarily relied on practical effects. Christopher Nolan is no stranger to massive set pieces. The director has created some of the most memorable action sequences of the 21st century. Part of what makes these scenes stand out is Nolan's refusal to rely on CGI. This philosophy carried through to the Trinity test scene in Oppenheimer, where the scientists set off a nuclear bomb. Of course, the crew couldn't set off an actual nuclear bomb. So, Nolan's effects team began creating an explosion that could mimic an atomic blast.
There was a huge effort in terms of utilizing current technology in a way that hasn't been done before.
This Herculean task was placed on the shoulders of VFX supervisor Andrew Jackson, who had also worked on Tenet and Dunkirk. What ended up looking like one blast was, in fact, a culmination of several explosions, both large and small. Jackson and special effects supervisor Scott Fisher created blasts out of propane and gasoline, which, when ignited, would create a mushroom-shaped cloud. They also added magnesium and aluminium powder, which made the explosions brighter. The largest explosions were made to look bigger through a simple optical trick. Jackson had the bomb placed between the tower and the camera, and made sure that the camera angle made it look like it was actually on the structure. This resulted in the explosion looking much larger than it actually was. Hoytema captured the larger explosions on 65mm IMAX and Panavision Panaflex System 65 studio cameras at 48 frames per second, allowing the blasts to be slowed down in post, making them look even bigger. By the end of the shoot, the post-production team had 100 VFX shots to work with. They composited them together with over 400 practical elements, making the explosion feel truly immersive. While it certainly was the largest, the Trinity test wasn't the only piece of VFX work in the film. They also had to create visions of subatomic particles and the nuclear apocalypse Oppenheimer is plagued with. Creating the subatomic visuals required a lot of experimenting. Jackson and Fisher would film various concepts and show them to Nolan to see what worked for him. Jackson explains.
We had spinning beads and magnets and ball bearings and hundreds of different ideas that we tried.
They landed on filming various elements in cloud tanks, large tanks with multiple layers of water to simulate the look of clouds. The crew placed aluminium flakes, burning thermite, and beads spun on wires inside the tank. They filmed at various frame rates and shutter speeds using the IMAX camera and its custom macro lens. Jackson elaborates on certain frame rate decisions.
The shot that we're simulating the electrons orbiting the nucleus of an atom, we did with beads spinning on wires and shot them at a very slow frame rate, so they had a very long exposure. So they were like very long, blurred lines.
The practical effects team's work resulted in countless shots of evocative nuclear and atomic imagery. It was then all placed together through the film's nonlinear structure.
Is anyone ever going to tell the truth about what's happening here?
Christopher Nolan loves nonlinear narratives. He has experimented with the passage of time in many of his films. This experimentation carries into Oppenheimer and lies at the heart of what sets it apart from a traditional biopic. Nearly the entirety of Oppenheimer is an exercise in cross-cutting, jumping between the physicist's journey towards the Manhattan Project, Lewis Strauss's Senate confirmation hearing, and Oppenheimer's security hearing. According to Nolan, this style of cutting creates efficient storytelling.
I try to pack a lot of passage of time, a lot of thought, a lot of experience on this character's part into a very short space of time. And so using montage and musical montage and that in a hopefully very focused way.
Editor Jennifer Lame was in charge of putting this complex interweaving story together.
all of the cutting between the timelines is in the script. And it was actually helpful that I wasn't on the shoot. I was able to come in and be like, well, this doesn't make sense. And this is a little confusing because I was like such fresh eyes. So I was able to point out a couple of problems. Chris's scripts are pretty tight in terms of what he shoots and then what we edit. When you move things around, it's a big deal.
Well, we all know what happened later.
Lame has worked on many dialogue-heavy projects. This made her the perfect match for a project like Oppenheimer.
We're not in court, sir. There's no burden of proof.
Right, they're not convicting.
For Lame, the primary challenge was getting through all the complicated and talky scenes without feeling rushed.
When you're dealing with a 3-hour biopic based on like a ginormous topic in a ginormous book, pacing is a problem. And that was always a problem that we were faced. How do you make people feel like they're not being rushed through something, but also not make this a 4-hour movie?
You see, we compact the atoms together under great pressure to induce a fusion reaction. Then we'll get not kilotons, but megatons.
The answer was not spending too much time on any one shot, especially in dialogue scenes, so that the film constantly had a propulsive motion, creating the feeling of a train rushing towards the edge of a cliff. Although much of the intercutting was written into the script, Lame and Nolan still experimented in the editing room, especially when it came to the brief visions haunting Oppenheimer.
That was a creative process of figuring out when and how to cut those in. And I would say that montage was very free-flowing. I remember recutting it completely on a Saturday and just hanging out with Chris and cutting it and talking and playing. All of that stuff was really fun and creative and exciting. And Chris is fun to do that stuff with because he just wants you to play. He'll just say, give it a play and wander out into his backyard and come back 45 minutes later.
In many ways, Oppenheimer is a culmination of all the tools and strategies Christopher Nolan has been perfecting over the course of his career. Large format, pioneering cinematography, jaw-dropping practical effects, and breakneck non-linear editing all work together to build an epic film about one of the most important figures in human history.
I'm so proud. So proud of what you have accomplished.
As Nolan's early work shows us, a great film doesn't need a huge budget, but it does need planning. Start your own movie with Studio Binder screenwriting and storyboard software. And check out the Studio Binder Academy channel for filmmaker interviews and in-depth tutorials on shot lists, storyboarding, and more. Bye for now. May your next project be a blast.
Again, don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day.